It's exactly 30 minutes past the hour. Welcome back to the program. We're glad you've stayed. Big story right here on KTN News. Now, among the proposals made by IMF and local banks to elevate Kenya's fiscal credit rating is reviewing the bank lending rates that were capped at 4% above the central bank rate. Cabinet Secretary Rotich promised the review will be undertaken even as banks continue to wreak tens of billions of shillings in profits. Let's listen to what the CS had to say first.
Challenges that we have seen with the interest rate caps, we have reviewed that and dropped that amendments that was done 2 years ago because we have seen the challenges that have happened. In return, we have put together a package of interventions. National Credit Insurance Scheme, we have also introduced the Kenya Development Bank, we have merged the Biashara Fund, and many other proposals that we have brought forward to you so that we can actually access credit much cheaper.
In studio, once again, I have the man who literally brought this law, that is Kiambu Town Member of Parliament June Jomo, as well as the Deputy Executive Director for Tax Justice, that is Jason Bragaza, and Dr. Kenneth Kambona is an international development consultant. Mheshimiwa, I'd like you to react to that statement that was made by the Treasury Cabinet Secretary a while back. And do you think reviewing, the interest cap rate is going to at least, save the current situation that we're witnessing?
I really sympathize with CS Rotich because he's a man who is under siege by the IMF and by the World Bank. And whatever he's saying, he's trying to justify why he has to remove or why he's proposing to remove the bank interest rate caps. As we very well know, IMF is a rich countries club, and they have no interest in our poor people. And whatever recommendations they are doing are not to the interest of our citizens. They are in interest of the countries, their masters. And we know that the voting rights of IMF really is dependent on contributions that the member states makes, and we know that the big countries which contribute most to the IMF are the policy makers, and these are the kind of policies that they would like to push down our throat. They are not saying that the caps are not good because they are not working for our country. The caps are not good because they are not working for their banks. These banks register take back the profits that they make in those countries, and the interest of IMF here is the profits that the banks are making, and they feel that these interest rate caps are restricting or are stopping the kind of profits that they would like to make. So really, when CS Rotich talks the way he's talking, he wants to get some loans from IMF, he wants to please IMF. But like I will talk to my colleagues in this bill comes, the time has come when we have to rescue our country from these giants international organizations that are not here for the interest of our people, but for the interest for their own interest and the interest of the organizations and businesses that they have invested here in Kenya.
Mheshimiwa, one will argue that the stand of the Treasury Cabinet Secretary perhaps is a reflection of the government stand, which is Jubilee's government. We're going to talk about that in detail shortly. But let me just pose this question to both Jason and Dr. Kambona. And let me begin with Jason. Jason, you've had Mheshimiwa's point of view there. Do you think the banks are honest when it comes to the laws, of interest caps? Because they're saying it has hindered them from business, but at the same time, we see them recording, profits running into billions.
I think Mheshimiwa has hit the nail on the head here on this one. It is definitely the industry that is trying to force the government, together with the multilateral fund, IMF fund, to untwist the government into a policy that's not in favor of the majority of Kenyans. And certainly the point Mheshimiwa has made on banks shifting their profits away from Kenya into other jurisdictions, particularly some could be in well-known tax havens and are supporting criminal activity, money laundering activity, proceeds from corruption. I think there is an argument here that could be made that the industry could be complicit in trying to twist the government into pursuing a policy that's not in the interest of the country as a whole, and certainly contribute to the out of the Kenyan economy into other tax jurisdictions. So I think there is a point there to be made, certainly. And again, it goes against some of the more positive legislation that we have seen in the recent past that the government has legislated through Parliament, contradicting these efforts. When you start hearing about what the industry is trying to do in arm twisting the government position on this.
Yes, Dr. Kambona, one of the excuses by banks, they're saying that they're seeing some sort of a decline in credit to the private sector. They're saying this is because of the law of interest caps. Once again, we're seeing the same banks making billions in profits. So let me just play back that question again. Do you think they're honest in this?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I've had a chance to also discuss it with other experts in the center, in the sector. And I think, and also with the Honorable Njomo here, but I think the one thing that should be done is, from the time that the Njomo bill was passed up to today, has somebody done some research work to actually know what benefit this gave to the small-scale farmer, to the small-scale person? I think, in my view, one of the biggest problems was to get the small person, I use that term, and I think Mr. Braganza agrees with me that, because the civil society is always on that case, to be bankable. And so, having done this for, is it a year or two or a year or so, don't we have data to show that actually it worked? Because at the end of the day, and like we've heard it from Mheshimiwa, is that the banks, of course, are for profit. And unless somebody comes to the rescue of the wananchi, then it will be very difficult for the wananchi to face big multinationals, now coupled with the strength of IMF. So I think that's one thing we should really, as a country, look at and say, okay, has it really benefited our small wananchi? Yes and no. And if it is yes, why don't we continue with it? If there is something to do, why don't we change it? But if we don't have affirmative action to have our wananchi access money or credit, then growth is going to be very difficult.
I think, Yusuf, even without going into research of looking for data,
yes,
we know very well that the banks, they said this even before the law was passed. They said that if the law is passed, they are not going to release any credit to small customers and small and medium enterprises. They said that, and they have gone by their threat.
And that's what exactly they've done at the moment.
That is exactly what they have done. So they have withheld this credit from these people. And what is the effect is that people are not able to do business. And that is what they are using as their data to go to government and saying, oh, your people are not being able to do business because they are not getting access to credit, so can you remove the caps? You remember last week they have said there will be 60 billion available. Immediately these caps are removed. What are they saying? That this is the only way we can give out the loans. So this bill, Yusuf, is coming to Parliament this week, I believe on Wednesday, to come to Parliament. And
are you addressing, perhaps, of course, you're going to tell us the details about that bill shortly. Are you addressing the fact that, away from the banks, it seems also the government itself is, putting heavy taxes on this private sector? I mean, at the moment, being a member of the private sector in Kenya seems to be, it seems like, someone is between a rock and a hard place. Are you addressing the issue to do with taxation?
Are we talking about taxation or are we talking about rates here?
Both.
Yeah, like we had talked about taxation, like taxation in fuel, which I personally say that's a bit, is quite high.
And, don't you think that also needs to be addressed in Parliament?
Yeah, it needs to be addressed, but I don't think it's coming with this finance bill. I'm not sure whether it's coming with it. And also the other challenge will be if it is on VAT. VAT is well defined that it is 16%. So I think it should have been given a different approach apart from approaching it from the VAT point of view. Also on M-Pesa, I also thought 12% was a bit on the higher side. It is important to tax mobile money transfer because it's a form of doing business. When you go to bank, you do a transfer, you pay some kind of tax. Whenever you are doing some kind of service, you pay government some form of tax. So even when we are using mobile money transfers, there must be some form of tax. But 12% could be a bit on the higher side, especially that being an entry point into the tax regime. But that said and done, back to the interest rates, and like I was saying, the bill is coming to Parliament this week. We plan also to introduce some amendments that could make the industry more stable. For example, in 2016, there was a proposal that the core capital of banks should be increased to 5 billion, up from 2 billion. This was designed to help make banks stronger, thus protecting the deposits that are made by wananchi. And we plan to reintroduce this over a period of 4 years. The tax base, the core capital to be increased from 2 billion to 5 billion. This will ensure that people who would put their deposits in banks are sure that these banks are not going to collapse tomorrow and they'll be looking for their money like they did in Chase Bank. We want banks, would rather have a few banks which are strong rather than have so many jokers of banks that are playing around with depositors' funds, doing money laundering, insider borrowing, and all that. It reminds me that the same happened in Nigeria, where there were hundreds of banks which were not serious banks. And when they introduced this increment of core capital, the banks reduced to 28 very strong banks that are able to support the Nigerian economy. And that is the direction we should take as a country.
Well said. As we conclude this discussion, I think the bottom line is it's a very tough time for those in the private sector because they're not getting credit from the banks. They'll also be facing, high taxes from the government side. But as we conclude this discussion, Jason and Dr. Kambona, if you look at the, let me begin with Jason. If you look at the debt right now that Kenya has, it has exceeded 4.5 trillion Kenyan shillings. As we conclude this debate, do you think that is sustainable in any way, Jason?
No, certainly it's not. These are some of the potential pitfalls that come when an economy does its rebasing, which Kenya did a few years ago, and moved a category up in terms of its economic classification according to the World Bank. It just meant that we could now borrow as a country or as a government at more competitive rates. We could also borrow on the open market with less stringent measures. And these are the fruits that we're now reaping all those years on after the economic rebasing. And just to bring it back slightly to the taxation question is that this is how Kenyan citizens are also starting to pay for this debt that the government is accumulating under the guise of infrastructure development or the Big Four agenda. We're seeing the taxes being levied on every single possible item that consumers are buying in the shops. We're seeing very basic commodities being incorporated into the VAT structure. And just to also demystify this notion that also the private sector is being taxed, Yusuf, I just needed to say here that, I think the private sector also does get quite a significant of tax exemptions and tax incentives from the government for its operations. TGNA did a study a few years ago, and we estimated that, the Kenyan government loses almost close to $1 billion every year through tax incentives. So, and tax exemption. So there is a case also to be made here that while business sector might feel that they are being heavily taxed, the burden really is on the Kenyan citizen as we see it this year in the finance bill for 2018. And it's one of the reasons why it is being challenged so strongly, because times are difficult. We've come out from a very unstable period, and people are just very uncertain in terms of what type of economic times lie ahead. But in terms of solution, like I said before, I think the most important thing is for the government to sit down and figure out how to tighten the loopholes in tax leakages, reduce incentives, reduce exemptions, and also figure out the type of tax agreements that they're signing with well-known tax havens.
Yes,
so
and Justin, I think corruption is also a big deal because this is a country that loses 600 billion from its budget every single year. Dr. Kambona, I'll give Mheshimiwa the last word, but before that, Dr. Kambona, I'd like you to talk about this, the debt that Kenya is facing at the moment, 4.5 trillion Kenyan shilling, and perhaps it's going to increase because I understand they're still fishing for some other loans. Do you think that is going to be sustainable?
Okay, let's start from the principle that every country has debt. So even the United States, China, where all countries do have. But it is the way we approach our debts in terms of acquiring them and managing them that is a problem. For now, ours is very scaringly high. For our GDP, I think if you're talking of 1.5, if you're talking of that value, it is quite scaring, and we can't afford to. And that was even alluded to, I don't know whether that was by the governor of the central bank. So it is high time we said, hey guys, why don't we start managing our debts? And we know how, and Braganza has just said, we know how we have acquired this debt. So the solution is the big capital investments that are going on, and recently we had the president capped the new projects going on so that we could scrutinize what were we spending or what was making us acquire more debt instead of managing what we have. So the issue is, it is time we stopped getting all these large debts and start managing what we have so that, look at the countries around us, you know, Kenya was once the envy of all this, but because of our debts, I think they are really surpassing us in the way they are managing things going forward. So Ethiopia, Tanzania, I mean, these are countries that now are coming up very strongly. So I think at the end of the day, it is caring, and we should do something about it, and we know what we should do about it.
We do hope the relevant authorities are listening to you. And speaking about authorities, we have a member of parliament in studio once again, that is Honorable Njombo. I'll give him the last word. Honorable Njombo, there's one viewer here at Ken. It's Ken says, what you are doing to your motherland, inflation now to rise by over 4%, your big four is just a daydream. Now that we've all projected tough times ahead for this country, where will that leave the big four agenda?
I think one of the most important things is what is being done right now, getting rid of those who are perpetuating corruption within the government circles, because this is what makes projects very, very expensive. And in every budget, there is a development aspect of the budget, and this is what we can peg our 4 arms of development in. And if we do it properly, I think the president has a big dream for this country. It is attainable and it can be done, so long as all the people who are concerned will just concentrate on doing the right things and getting rid of corruption, because corruption is one of the things that have made development very, very expensive. I believe that with the cleanup that is ongoing, we are going to get rid of the rotten potatoes, so that we can remain with people who will be focused in executing the work that and that we are going to achieve the four dreams of our president.
Many thanks, Honorable Jomo, for your input. That is Jordan Jomo of Parliament, Kiambu Town. And then we are speaking earlier to the Deputy Executive Director for Tax Justice Network Africa, Justin Braganza, and Dr. Kenneth Kambona, who is an international development consultant. Many thanks, gentlemen, for your input at a time when the government has up to now remained mum on the stringent IMF regulations there, and we've not even seen that report. It's yet to be made public at a time when Kenyans, are going to dig deeper into their pockets in the coming few months with the new taxes that we've seen put in place. Many thanks for watching. My name is Joseph Ibrahim. This has been The Big Story. Up next is KTN Prime. Stay with us.